Hello, students. This is Professor McDermott with the video recap of your Module 1 discussions. Well, we have a lot to talk about with these interesting documents that you had, so let's dive right into that. I'll save the announcements for the email I'll send out shortly. All right, the Age of Exploration. Christopher Columbus. Group 1 had a letter that he had written to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain, who had financed his expedition trying to get to Asia, but ending up in the West Indies in the Caribbean. And the first question I asked Group 1 was how does Columbus describe the Indians that he met, and why does he describe them that way? And here's the group answer that you came up with, posted by Brandy Bowman. Excellent job as chair, Brandy. Columbus describes the Indians he meets as, quote, well-formed with handsome bodies and good faces, end quote. He also describes how he thinks that the people are very poor in everything. Also, he mentions multiple times how they do not seem to have religion. He wants the king to see that he could easily convert the Indians. He mentions how the Indians are gentle, explaining that they will not be a threat, which is another reason why he mentions their not knowing about weapons. In his last letter, he also describes how the Indians thought they, the Europeans, were gods. He described the Indians in the way that he did, gentle and harmless people who would be easily converted to Christianity, because he wanted the king and queen to support him and fund him for more exploration. Excellent, Group 1. And it's very important as we read all these documents through the course to keep in mind what their purpose is and who the author is writing for. And in this case, you're absolutely right. Everything in this document is very much influenced by Columbus's desire to get the king and queen of Spain to think that it's going to be very easy to conquer and convert these Indians to Christianity, which was one of Columbus's main motives. He was a deeply religious Catholic Christian. And so he really spends everything in an attempt to get the king and queen on board to fund more exploration and more expeditions to the New World. And also, Tatiana Jerquisha and Brandy, you all noticed that he said that the Indians would make good servants, appealing to the king and queen of Spain, a new servant population to use. And Lavandria, you had a very interesting point. You noticed that he said they were gold nose rings, and Europeans just perked up when they saw gold or heard about gold. And so, of course, pursuing gold is something else that's going to be a motive here in the New World. Question 2, I asked, why does Columbus talk about the Indians' religious life in the way that he does? And Group 1, you mentioned several factors that he brings up, that the Indians are very naive, very impressionable, and above all, that he thinks they have no religion. So again, they'll be very easy to convert to Christianity. But Cantilia Collins, you had a very interesting point here. You said one of the things that stuck out to me in this excerpt was the very last sentence. Columbus stated that the people, quote, believed that we, Europeans, had come from the heavens, end quote. Just from that particular belief in itself, I also feel that it would be easy for them to convert to Christianity, especially because they do not belong to any religion. He also mentioned how generous and gracious they were, which are attributes of Christians. He also says that they are of good understanding. Interesting that he says they have no religion, but then says they believed the Spanish came from the heavens. And that really is a contradiction in this document, and it shows, I think, how we always tend to see new things and new people in terms of our own cultural expectations. So for Columbus, the Indians had no religion because, as a Catholic, having religion for him meant having priests and nuns and praying the rosary and having church buildings and so forth. So he thinks the Indians have no religion, but clearly they do have a religion because they believe that Columbus and his men came from the heavens, and they believe that they're gods, which would make them more inclined to accept what the Europeans had to teach them. And so, really, you see how Columbus is looking through his own cultural lenses and spinning everything to the king and queen of Spain, telling them what they want to hear. Finally, Group 1, Question 3. Columbus makes some very interesting statements about the Indians and their knowledge of weapons. And he believes that they're very ignorant and naive about weapons, too. And here's the group answer that you came up with. In his letter, Columbus states, quote, "I showed them swords and they took them by the edge and through ignorance cut themselves," end quote. Columbus thought that the Indians were naive about weapons because they did not know anything about the Spanish weapons or how to use them. They definitely did not have experience with European weapons. But Columbus did state that they had, quote, "javelins with shafts without iron, and some of them have at the end a fish tooth," end quote. So the Indians did have their own weapons, they were just different. They also had battle scars from fighting with other people who had tried to take over their land, so we know they had some sort of weapons for that. So again, you see here that Columbus thinks the Indians are peace-loving and gentle and don't know anything about fighting simply because they don't know how to handle a Spanish sword. But clearly, from the rest of the text, you see that the Indians did have weapons, they did fight, and Columbus would find that out to his detriment when he left some men on the island of Hispaniola and came back on his second voyage and found they had all been massacred by the Indians there. But again, Columbus is presenting this in the best possible light to promote further exploration by Spain. Okay, outstanding job, Group 1. You guys really did a great job in your focus thread discussions. It was very deep, very detailed. That's what we're looking for. All right, Group 2, this is moving on to the conquest of the Aztecs by Cortez in Mexico. And their Group 2's document was by Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who was one of the conquistadors, who was with Cortez during the conquest. And it's his attempt to set the record straight about what really happened. And he talks in very glowing terms about the Emperor Montezuma. And so I asked the group to describe what does Diaz admire about Montezuma. And here's the group answer posted by Brianna Mack, the chair. And thank you so much, Brianna, for stepping in at the last minute when one student dropped the class and taking over his chair. You did a nice job. As a group, we all agree that what he admired is the emperor's clothes and appearance, the many meals he ate, his houses of weaponry, and his wives. And Haley Rainey, you had a very nice detailed explanation of this. There are several things that Diaz finds remarkable about Montezuma. He first started off by describing Montezuma with how he looks, what he ate, different types of clothes he wore when he changed those clothes, and even about the women he saw. He spoke highly about the skilled workmen whom Montezuma employed and all the crafts that they practiced, beginning with the jewelers and workers in silver and gold. He also spoke about the great number of entertainers Montezuma employed to entertain him. He talked about the garden with their many varieties of flowers and sweet-scented trees planted. Very nice details there, Haley. All right. Diaz also talks about Aztec culture in general in very admiring terms. And in question 2, I asked the group to explore that. Aaron, I liked your post, Aaron Ravago. 4 of the things that Diaz admired were their craftsmanship with silver, gold, and jewelry, their weavers and seamstresses, their street performers, and their gardens. So Diaz really praises and compliments the Aztecs, and I think this shows us that it's a mistake to think that all Europeans came to the New World thinking the Indians were just savages, that they had no culture, no civilization. In fact, Europeans were often prepared to admire Indian culture, but there was one aspect of Aztec culture that the Spaniards found absolutely horrifying. And I asked in question 3, what was that aspect that Diaz talks about? And in the group answer, you said, when discussing what Diaz criticized the most, we came to the agreement that he criticized the practice of sacrificing, human sacrifice. He had a negative and graphic tone in this part of the passage. And John Matthews, I liked your post. You said, Diaz criticizes the sacrifices that they make. The language spoken in that paragraph is gruesome and torching, and it is. The whole tone of the story changes when he begins to speak of these human sacrifices. And yes, it absolutely does. In fact, it's almost like for the first part of this document, Diaz is in heaven with the fantastic gardens and the palace and all the craftsmen and the open-air markets with all kinds of goods and great food and so forth. But then it's like we go into hell when he starts talking about the human sacrifices. And This was something the Spaniards could not accept, and in later years, when the Spanish admitted that they had done bad things to the Aztecs and had enslaved them and robbed them of their culture, this still was a great motivating factor for the Spanish conquest. That at least we got rid of the human sacrifices. So this was a real motive for these Christians from Spain to take over the Aztec Empire. All right, group three, you had a different perspective. This was an Aztec account written down later by some Spanish priests who were sympathetic to the Aztecs, an Aztec account of the conquest. And it's very dramatic. So I asked first, how did Montezuma treat Cortez? And in the group answer posted by Michael Redding, who also did a nice job as chair, here's what you came up with. Emperor Montezuma greets Spanish explorer Cortez in a very respectful, gratuitous, and honored manner. He believes that through generations of storytelling that Cortez is the god Quetzalcoatl coming for his throne. And Montezuma has the humility to humbly hand over all power to Cortez, but not before he is showered with gifts of gold, beautiful flowers, and